Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group MACV-SOG was a highly classified, multi-service United States Special Operations Unit which conducted covert unconventional warfare operations prior to and during the Vietnam War. Established on 24 January 1964, the unit conducted strategic reconnaissance missions in the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, North Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, carried out the capture of enemy prisoners, rescued downed pilots, conducted rescue operations to retrieve prisoners of war throughout Southeast Asia, and conducted clandestine agent team activities and psychological operations. The unit participated in most of the significant campaigns of the Vietnam War, including the Gulf of Tonkin incident which precipitated increased American involvement, Operation Steel Tiger, Operation Tiger Hound, the Tet Offensive, Operation Commando Hunt, the Cambodian Campaign, Operation Lam Son 719, and the Easter Offensive. The unit was downsized and renamed Strategic Technical Directorate Assistance Team 158 on 1 May 1972 to support the transfer of its work to the Strategic Technical Directorate of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, part of the Vietnamization effort. The Studies and Observations Group, also known as SOG, MACV-SOG, and MACV-SOG, was a top-secret, joint unconventional warfare task force created on 24 January 1964 by the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a subsidiary command of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV. The unit would eventually consist primarily of personnel from the United States Army Special Forces, the United States Navy SEALs, the United States Air Force, USAF, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and elements of the United States Marine Corps Force reconnaissance units. However, this video is about UNPIK 82 40th Far East Command. This unit was like SOG, but during the Korean War. UN partisan operations in Korea came about more by chance than from planning. During the retreat out of North Korea in November-December 1950, thousands of anti-communist North Korean citizens were left behind to fend for themselves. Facing almost certain death at the hands of the communists, these people fought their way to North Korea's west coast and sailed to offshore islands, where they prepared to fight a last-ditch battle. The fact that armed friendly North Koreans still held the offshore islands came to the attention of 8th Army on 8 January 1951. A mad scramble ensued to utilize these unexpected assets, and on January 15, the guerrilla section, 8th Army G3 Miscellaneous, came into being. A 6-man cadre originally code-named Task Force William Able, but soon changed to Leopard, arrived on Pyeongdu, a large island off the North Korean-held west coast, on February 15, 1951, starting the massive task of bringing partisan groups under 8th Army command. This in itself was a major undertaking since these groups held islands from the Han River estuary to the mouth of the Yalu River. All initial contact by Leopard team members was made only after a slow, several-day ride in a hothead diesel fishing junk, but by mid-March all individual groups, now bearing a designation of Donkey plus a unit number, were under Leopard's control. Leopard's West Coast seaborne and interior North Korea operations started producing immediate results. But the influx of arms, ammunition, explosives, medical supplies, food and communications equipment and improving weather, Leopard sent infiltration teams to contact and supply partisan groups already operating within North Korea. Bridges were blown, roads and railroads interdicted, small North Korean and Chinese detachments wiped out, and, just as importantly, reliable agent nets established. This activity forced the CCF and NF commands to divert badly needed frontline units to local security anti-partisan operations. Leopard's strength expanded daily, and, by June 1951, West Coast partisans counted over 8,000 men on the active roster. This, plus distance and poor communications, made Miscellaneous Group Headquarters rethink its organization. Wolfpack Headquarters was established to command partisan operations on the south coast of Hwanghae Province, while Leopard moved its forward headquarters north to Koje-do and commanded West Coast operations from the 38th parallel north to the Yalu River. Wolfpack initially established its headquarters on Yeonpyeongdo, an island group at the mouth of Heju Estuary centrally located between Pyeongdu to the west and the mouth of the Han River to the east. Wolfpack headquarters later moved to Kangwon-do, an island at the mouth of the Han adjacent to the mainland. Results by these two units were excellent by the ceasefire. They were credited with forcing the enemy to have 75,000 troops on security duty in Hwanghae Province alone. Additionally, they compiled a phenomenal record of successful actions, combined with a relatively small loss record. Shortly, within the Leopard organization, an airborne special missions unit, Baker, became operational at Kijang near Pusan. This unit had the multiple mission of providing airborne training to agents and partisan raider groups, planning and carrying out agent or partisan drops, and controlling and resupplying these people once they were in North Korea. This was a tall order for the 2 officers and 2 non-coms initially assigned to Baker, particularly when you consider these men lacked formal UW training or UW experience, and everything was OJT. One of these officers was Lieutenant Paul Christensen.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in East Williston, Long Island. At the time, my Newport parents were living in New York. My father's business was in Manhattan. So when I was born, we were living on Long Island.
How old were you in 1941 to 45?
I was born in 1932. I've been 8 or 9 years old starting that time and unto 13.
So did you know about the war?
Yes, the war news was everywhere. My parents made sure the children knew everything. We had formal meals and discussed the current events at the table, even as children. The newsreels were all the war going on in Europe before we got into the war. All of the toys were war toys, little toy machine guns, and all the games we played outside went from cowboys and Indians, Nazis and Japs and Americans. We made up our little war games playing. That was before television and everything, and people had big families and they just put them all out, come back by supper time, and we made up our own games and had our own rules and everything. But everything was centered around war. The important part of it was a Saturday morning kiddie show. It allowed the parents a little privacy, and they sent the kids to the movies Saturday morning. We saw cartoons and a fun Abbott and Costello movie, and there was always a movie told news about the war going on in Europe, what was happening. So we adapted on the westerns. My brother and I identified with the guy with the white hat fighting the bullies, and when the war movies and serials came along, the attitude, stance of the soldiers and everything else, we sort of absorbed that. And when we, at early age, both got into the military, we were already indoctrinated about manners and how to operate. It was part of our early training.
Who was the first person in your family to join up?
My brother Paul, who was 2 years older than I am. Actually, he got a forged birth certificate. He used to run away from home a lot. He was out west working on a cattle ranch in Nevada, and some guys, he was big for his age. Some recruiters got him a forged birth certificate, and I have the letter he sent to my mother. Guess what? I'm in the paratroopers. And he was only just 16, just after being 15. And he got away with it. He ended up in Japan as an MP in the northern Hokkaido until when they found out about him, and they shipped him home, gave him an honorable discharge. And when he was 17, my mother and father signed him back in again, and he stayed in for another 20-some years.
Paul joining inspired you to join?
Oh yes, we just got a new house on Long Island, and I didn't know how sick my father was. He was actually dying, but he was bossing me around trying to get a lot done. He knew he was dying, and I couldn't stand it. I was a rangy teenager, self-centered. I was going bonkers, and my brother had just gone through OSS and was on his way to Korea in the early part of the Korean War. And he saw the situation, discussed it with my mother, and they thought they better get me out of that environment. So my mother signed the papers so I could enlist at age 17. She forged my father's signature. He wouldn't even talk to me. And my brother took me downtown Manhattan and to the recruitment office, and boom, boom, there I was, still 17, in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in the 11th Airborne, start my basic training.
So you joined the Army, but your grandfather was in the Navy. Did the Navy ever cross your mind?
We have a dozen or so relatives, my older relatives, in the different parts of the Navy. Grandpa Chris came from Denmark with his family when he was 4 years old. He joined the American Navy officially as an apprentice boy. In Newport, they had a school with about 500 boys from 13 on, and they taught them seamanship, as well as general education, morals, marched them to church, all that kind of stuff. They were in all the patriotic parades of the time in uniform, and the idea, once they get to be 18 years old, they could opt to stay in as a regular sailors or leave. Their training ship was the USS Constellation, the last cannon man of war made in America, and which is now a permanent floating museum in Baltimore Harbor now. Everybody should go see it. But he, after that, he served on about a dozen or more ships throughout the Philippine insurrection, the Spanish-American War, the First World War, and then he retired in Newport, and he went back during World War II with a quasi-government outfit that he was the mate on a ship, a boat that took Italian prisoners from Quonset Point, Narragansett Bay, to Fort Adams, where they quartered them. A lot of Italian prisoners and some German prisoners. They just took them all the way out of Europe and put them all over the place in America, working on farms and everything. So, so that's, I have a lot of 4 or 5 great uncles who retired as chiefs. 2 of them were lieutenant commander doctors, Navy doctors and so forth, but a lot of Navy. But I like the idea of the Army and the paratroopers. My brother convinced me, $50 extra a month and all that kind of stuff.
You want to be a paratrooper from the beginning?
When I was getting my physical, apparently I've always had a heart murmur. My aortic valve had only 2 leads instead of 3, and that makes it squeak. And the doctor heard it, and he said, well, I don't think I can okay you for airborne. You have a little heart problem. And I said, I started to get almost crying. I said, well, that's because I ran upstairs. I'm out of window. He said, you really want to go in that bad? And I said, yes. You know, I was about to bawl. And he said, okay, I'll okay it, but if you feel you're running into trouble, tell them, turn yourself in, and maybe they'll give you a, you know, an easier job. And that's how I squeaked into the paratroops.
So out of jump school, where were you assigned to?
After jump
school.
After jump school in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, it was the first class of the small jump school because Fort Benning couldn't produce enough paratroopers that were needed at that time. So the first class, General Lemnitzer, a World War II general, NATO guy, he was in our class. The sergeant would say, get down and give me 20 push-ups, sir. And General Lemnitzer would drop and do the push-ups. Anyway, he was our wind dummy when we made our first jump. We go up and they throw one guy out, in this case the general, to see how the wind was going so the plane could tell where to drop us, so we drift to the drop zone. That was our first jump of this first class of the jump school there. So anyway, we were doing advanced training. We flew down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, into Southern Pines, and we were assigned to be the aggressors in the largest maneuver since World War II, 100,000, training the 43rd and 24th, whatever divisions, I forget just which. The Korea was already going on and we were doing bad there, but the biggest concern was the Russians in Europe were aggressive. We threw away our army after World War II. The Russians built theirs up and started crowding in. So the military, the government was afraid of what Russia was. So we were rushing these two National Guard divisions over there, but they needed training. So for a month in the woods of Southern Pines, we were the aggressors in the woods, like in the Dirty Dozen type of thing, maneuvering with empires against these two divisions, trying to, bring them up to snuff before they were sent off to Europe. And then we went back to our base in Fort Campbell, and I volunteered for the pipelines. They wanted more paratroopers over in Korea, in Japan. The 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team, which was the only paratrooper outfit in the Korean War. So they flew us over real quick, Canadian Pacific Airlines, up to Alaska, to Shimiya, and on to Tokyo. And then by little Japanese trains down to Kyushu, where the 187th was established. And that's how I got from there to there.
What year was that?
Huh?
What year was that?
That was 1951. I know that because we left the day before Thanksgiving, and the prop planes took so long, we got to Tokyo the day after Thanksgiving. We didn't get any turkey. The international date line was there.
And how old were you then?
I was just 18.
Just 18. So when you were with the 187th, you were involved in a prison uprising?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
When General MacArthur made a surprise landing in Incheon, which nobody expected because the tide in the Yellow Sea was 50 feet. You have water as far as you could see. 12 hours later, it was mud as far as you could see. And General MacArthur had to plan the invasion by the minute to be able to land where the tides were just right and not get stranded out in the mud flats. So he successfully made that landing, cut across the top of the middle of Korea. At that time, we were almost getting thrown out of Korea from the Busan perimeter that we were holding down south. But once they were cut off, the North Koreans all scrambled to try to get out. And that way we captured about 100,000 of them, and later 50,000 Chinese. But they were all crammed onto an island called Koje-do, south of Busan, and enormous compounds, like 6,000 and 8,000 prisoners in one thing, with unqualified guards and generals and such. And anyway, they basically took over control of everything. Colonel Lee from North Korea was deliberately captured as a corporal so he could resurface in this big compound down on the prison island and take charge of what was going to be an insurrection. They had machine gun, they had tunnels dug under all the machine gun guard towers ready for a breakout, and we had agents inside that told us what was going on. So the breakout was immediate. It would be 100,000 communists opening a second front south of Busan on these islands. And so we were on a very nice base in Kumamoto in southern Japan. Organized athletics after lunch. I was playing tennis with a guy, and then the horn went off. We knew that was to rush to the barracks and grab your pack, which is always ready, and rifle, and head out on the parade field. We did that. There were about 100 trucks lined up with the motors running. We told to fill the trucks up, rush through the city of Kumamoto. The mama-sans that were owed money by some of the guys that kept rooms and girls in the town were all wailing by the side of the road. And anyway, the trucks went to the railhead and the trains were puffing ready. We all piled in the trains and went to the military airfield, and all our C-47 planes that we jumped from were lined up, not only lined up, but the propellers the engines were going, the propellers were turning. We were told to double time across the runway and in orderly fashion, staying in formation, cohesion, piled on the planes, and just as soon as the door shut, they took off. And not until then did we know that we were going to prevent the breakout on Koje-do. Before that, the rumors were we were going to drop in China and all this kind of stuff. Nobody knew what was happening. It was sort of scary. We landed in Busan, in a military airfield. There were trucks ready, took us to the LSTs on the dock. This was nighttime. We all got on the LSTs and lay down on the deck and went to sleep. In the morning, we were in Koje-do, just a little south of Busan, and we filed off. There were trucks there, took us to where they had prepared all our squad tents and all installations for us to be in. And so there we were, and we rose by all these compounds with all the communists in it, all chanting and singing the Internationale, and with all the posters of Baby Kim's grandfather, who was running North Korea at the time. They made portraits with blood and ketchup and charcoal and everything else like that. They were very industrious. But what we had to do was make 500-man compounds, and when we break up the big compounds, have a place to put them. So we spent almost a month as laborers, round the clock, 12-hour shifts with jackhammers, putting great big 6x6 uprights and stringing barbed wire and concertina wire on top of it and everything. I still have some barbed wire scars, I think. But they treated us well. They gave us extra meals. They imported real steaks, which we were sort of living on World War II C rations, cans of sausage patties that were, 8, 10 years old, but real steaks and real ice cream and all that stuff, because we were working so hard. Meanwhile, when we were trying to sleep, the prisoners in the compounds jammed in there. They were sleeping in 3-hour shifts, and the two shifts that were awake kept singing around the clock, the Internationale and North Korean Communist War songs and everything. So there was almost never a time when all this singing was, so it was unnerving, but we were so tired from working so hard, we were able to sleep. But General Boatner was a World War II commander, and he was over on the mainland as part of our early efforts to hold the Koreans and Chinese in check. But he was very educated general, like a lot of those generals were extremely educated. He spoke Chinese, and he took over, and the idea was to give them the option. Boatner was there on the microphone, dong, 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 talking Chinese to them, that come peacefully or we'll come and get you. We had great big gondola trucks with barbed wire top on it that they should file out and get into and be trucked to the new 500-man compounds that we made. It was known nationally that this was going to happen, so there were bleachers set up for the International Red Cross and the international press, the ones that liked us and didn't like us, to make sure, be witnesses if we abuse these POWs in this process. That's why the 80 or so of us that went in, we had World War II gas masks on, ready, M1 rifles with bayonets fixed. We had ammunition clips, but in our bandoliers, not in no rounds in the rifles, because they didn't want an incident that the international press could blow up, against us. So when everything, and of course, to protect us, there were quad 50s all over the place, flamethrowers, and other heavy stuff that if we started to be overwhelmed, they would sort of open up and make a big difference and try to extradite us from the situation. Of course, there were 80 of us and 6,000 or 8,000 of them. Now, for a year, they've been digging trenches all over the place. They had total control of their environment inside the compounds. In fact, the American general went to the gate to answer General Dodd, to answer their complaints, and they gathered around him and swooped him into the thing. Suddenly the American general was their hostage. And front page, New York Times, everything, most incredible thing happened, so it took a while to get his release. But it showed you the control they had and the power they had. They could do it whatever they want. But anyway, all these trenches were there. They took the big 50-gallon drums. They had a forge inside, so they made spearheads, which they attached to poles. So we marched in and had a line right across the whole compound, ready to advance. And all we could see in front of us was sharpened spears with metal tips piling into these great big trenches in front of us, and gave an indication that they were not ready to march out yet. So we started a shuffle forward, and nobody broke, so our side behind us, they started throwing concussion grenades. A guy next to me was a CBS reporter. He had a backpack and he was making a tape. He said, "In the background you can hear explosions. These are concussion grenades. They are meant to stun and frighten people, not to hurt them. But there were hundreds of them thrown, as what the tear gas is being thrown now too, so the whole area was covered with tear gas, but we had gas masks on. But every once in a while you'd see one of the North Koreans' arms go twirling up in the air. The concussion grenades were maybe especially strong. So, but anyway, with the tear gas and with the noise and the concussion grenades, they started to break. And some of them made a charge, and one of our American soldiers got a spear in the groin, in whatever artery is in there, and he bled out and died before the medics could secure that. That was our one fatal casualty. About 200 and so North Koreans diehards were killed in the process, but the rest of them, blinded with the tear gas and out of control by the leaders, gave up and sort of started loading them into the gondolas and trucking them onto the smaller compounds that we had built for a month. And then, of course, all their buildings we set on fire, so everything was burnt and everything was exposed, so there was no place to hide. And that was the end of the thing. And all the other compounds, there were another one nearby with 6,000 in it and a bunch of smaller ones. Once they realized what happened, they all gave up, didn't resist. They all got trucked off to all the little compounds. And that was the successful end of this incident, the Battle of Koje-do, that nobody ever heard of. Until now, when I'm telling you about it.
Yeah. So, when did you first see combat in Korea?
Okay, when we were removed from Koje-do, we were on a train, went up to Daegu, which is not halfway up to the middle part of Korea, with our new commander, Colonel William F. Westmoreland, of Vietnam fame leader. And we got in Daegu. He got up on the PT, physical exercise platform, and he said, "Men, I told Jim Van Fleet, who was running Korea at the time, if he doesn't let my men up on the line, I can't be responsible for what happened to the city of Daegu." He was a bit of a ham, and we all, airborne, all that stuff. And so that was the plan. We did a practice jump there in Daegu and did a little training, and got on a train, went north to the Kumwa Valley, where the 7th Division was holding the line. We replaced part of the 7th Division on the line. They went back to reserve, and we were Blackjack 7. So an infantry regiment, the quad 50s and the I was a mortar specialist, so I scouted out a thing to set up my 60mm mortars and develop fire directions, stakes and everything for any future attack or anything, so it already be zeroed in. That's what you do with the mortars. And so we settled, this was the beginning of the summer. Well, no, the middle of the summer. And we started doing small reconnaissance patrols and that kind of stuff. But Colonel Westmoreland, it was a stalemate. The peace talks were going on forever. Everyone was hunkered down, waiting to get out of there alive. Colonel Westmoreland, a young officer, wasn't comfortable just sitting there twiddling his thumbs, so he planned an operation. Directly in front of us, across the valley, had a railroad running through it. The railroad was the DMZ. Across from it was a Papasan, a great big mountain full of Chinese and artillery and stuff like that. A smaller, not a mountain, but a big hill to the side faced us. On the reverse side, there were big caves, and the Chinese would pull all their artillery out and bombard us, and then push everything back in the cave and barricade the door. By the time the Navy Corsair planes came by, they couldn't see them to get them. So Colonel Westmoreland figured out if we could get on the adjoining hill behind the cave secretly and set up with our recoilless rifles and machine guns at night, and when the daytime came and they opened up the caves, we could just shoot right into the caves, killing not only them but blowing up their stores of artillery ammunition, which in fact happened. So anyway, the Pathfinders found a way of getting through, and a bunch of us, including myself, no helmets, nothing that rattled, or no voice communications. We had white stripes on the back of everybody so you could follow the guy ahead of you, and complete noise suppression. And left like at just after midnight, and followed the Pathfinders across a thing they developed across the DMZ, along the creek and through some woods, and for about 2 hours, and got to the hill across from the caves, set everything up, zeroed in on the entrance of the caves, and waited until the morning when they took the barricades at the doorways, and they all came out and started to cook their rice and shattering and all that kind of stuff. At that time, suddenly, all the artillery on the whole American front opened up on the big mountain and the top of the small mountain that we were gonna shoot to suppress anything coming from the North Koreans against us, because we were sort of a small unit, sort of helpless. The Navy Corsairs and Navy jets started bombing everything, and partly with smoke, so everything got obscured. And we opened up with the whistle blowing into the caves and sort of blew the hill apart a bit because of all the ammunition stored there. And machine gunned anyone outside, and basically for 15 minutes did all this destruction. And our instructions were, once it was done, the whistle blew, and you just ran like hell back the way we came, in disorder, no formation or anything. And don't worry about if you lose something, just get out of there. The artillery was suppressing everybody, the smoke, the jets and everything, and we just ran like thieves. And we started giggling because it seemed sort of funny, just to boom, 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 and then run like hell. And we got across the DMZ and everything to a cut in the hill, and General Westmoreland was standing there, Colonel Westmoreland was there to greet us there with a big smile on his face. Good jobs, men, and all that kind of stuff. And it was successful. That was one of the last big operations in the Korean War. You know, we were through from the line. The 7th Division guys came back on. We flew back to our base in southern Japan, and Colonel Westmoreland gets up on the PT stand and said, "Men," he held up a little star that they just, he said, "This is not my star, it's your star, you give it to me." That was his first star. And then, of course, he went on to unhappy stuff in Vietnam 12 years later. We were back there, and that's when my brother Paul manipulated to get me into his 8240 Army unit.
Did you know Paul was trying to get you into the 8240th?
Yes, at that time.
And did you know what the 8240th was about?
He gave me a hint. It was the bridge between the OSS in Europe in the Second World War and Special Forces today. It was irregular. We had irregular North Korean anti-communist troops, 50,000 of them. We controlled most of the big islands on the coast of the Yellow Sea on the west and the east coast, up, above the line, and we trained and ran the all these Korean indigenous. We formed them into battalions, and I and other people like me were called advisors. We were the liaison between the leader of these people and the Army controlled. We were the guys from which all good things came: the rice, the training, the equipment, and the planning and the operations.
What were your duties at 8240th?
My specialty was the mortar. My first island I went to was Koje-do, which is like 90 miles above the 38th parallel. It was just off the coast of North Korea, close enough for to be within artillery range. We were a bit exposed, but we were protected by a British cruiser who kept cruising around and was ready to bombard them if they made a play to attack us. So it was a protective shield. And so I had this whole bunch of 81 millimeter mortars, and I had to teach different teams of Koreans how to, rapidly set it up, do the direction, and get it in position for immediate firing in whatever direction necessary. All the basic mortar training. And we also did the supplies there. A great big huge kettle, and they'd make a 100-pound thing of rice. We've had them rice, 3/4 rice and 1/4 barley, which they didn't much like. And a lot of it was American Louisiana rice, which they didn't like at all, because Taiwan rice was bigger, tastier, and what they were used to. But they were beggars, and beggars can't be choosy, and when they're hungry they'd eat it. But I also ate it 3 times a day. I could buck the line, and I'd get there with my mess kit and blop, 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 mess kit full of rice. And before the meals, some of them would comb them out and get certain edible greens that they knew about, and they'd stew up the greens, and you get some of these edible greens with the rice there, the indigenous stuff. And I'd gussy mine up with some chili sauce and sea ration stuff and make it edible. But the only time I got a good feed was the British would send a launch over and take me and my 6'4" Mongolian bodyguard, my interpreter, and a couple of guards out to the cruiser for tea. They called it tea. and got up under the cruiser and hear all these British twit officers with their white shorts and they say, "Hey, what's it like there? Pretty rough out there with the guerrillas, eh?" I'd growl. I was only 19. I'd say, "Yeah, very good," and they would tell them slightly exaggerated tales to keep them happy. But tea was not tea. Tea was Johnny Walker Scotch and all kinds of goody things to eat, and tour the cruiser. Very nice afternoon. And when they sending us back, the great big boxes full of real steaks, real ice cream, real food, where I've been living on sea rations and rice, and that was quite a treat.
When was the first time you met up with my father, your brother Paul, in Korea or Japan?
First time in Japan, when he got me officially transferred to the FECLDK, Far East Japan Liaison Detachment, which was the parent operation of 8240. I took the train up to Tokyo and went to a abbreviated intelligence school that they ran, and I got through all that. My group was just ready to go to Korea when I and 33 other guys got a bad case of infectious hepatitis. They tracked it to a Japanese server in the PX soda shop. That was everybody's contact, so it was very contagious. It was a serious case. A couple of guys died from it. They waited too long before turning themselves in. So I was stuck in this Tokyo General Hospital. It was a very advanced pre-war Japanese hospital in Tokyo, which we deliberately did not bomb because we wanted to use it when we conquered Japan. Like several other buildings and locations in Japan, we avoided bombing them so we'd have the use of them once we conquered Japan. But anyway, the American Army ran it. At that time, they were also training young Japanese doctors in it, looking forward. But at that time, there we were, stuck in that thing, and almost for a month. I was transferred into a rehab part, and that's when Paul came on a mission from Korea and signed me out for a couple of days. And what he was up to then was squiring a Japanese pre-war movie star. I think she was Cinderella in this movie or something. Very pretty lady who had married an American pilot who was on a secret mission. He was flying over Red China and got shot down and bailed out or whatever and got captured. Paul's assignment was to stick with her, more or less. We're having one of the Navy jets flying over here, but I'll try to talk a little louder above it. Anyway, to see if the Chinese contacted her anyway, or any way of contacting with the eye of a future prisoner swap or spy swap or something like that. So I have no idea how all that kind of stuff ended or not. But anyway, myself and Paul and whatever her name was went to one of the biggest Japanese nightclubs, great big dance band, dance hall, 100 people at tables. And when we walked into the room, she stood there, and these hundreds of people, Japanese, all started applauding because that's how famous she was amongst the Japanese. And so we had, drinks and had time in it. When I had quite a lot of drinks then, so I was pretty high. And so Paul, my brother, did not take me back to the rehab. He took me to the Uraka Hotel, which was taken over by the Army as an officer's billet. And we went in, of course, he was in his lieutenant paratrooper uniform, and I was in my sergeant paratrooper uniform. So we go up to the desk clerk. We want 2 rooms, one for myself and one for my brother, Lieutenant Christensen here. He's wearing a sergeant stripes. He's on a mission. And the guy just accepted that. The next morning, we went out to the PX for breakfast and chatted around and all that stuff. And he dropped me back off at my rehab, and he flew back to Korea to do other duties. And then I was all set, and I got in the airfield, myself and Sergeant Lamb, and flew back to, finally flew over to Korea. Caught up with my
Say it again. The island you were on was above the 28th parallel?
Yes, about 90 miles.
90 miles.
It can be seen on most maps because it was pretty big. Koje-do, C-H-O-D-O. D-O is apparently island.
So what is the funniest story you can tell about your time in Korea?
Is the Korean tradition of having little formal drinking parties where everybody's lets down their hair. We're in a great big squad tent, an array of tables, about 20 of us, Koreans and American advisors and such. In the middle, it's nighttime, in the middle of it is a Coleman lantern on the table, which had the effect of lighting everybody up from below, making everything spooky looking sort of. And aside from drinking and chatting, then there's a roundabout. Everybody has to stand up one at a time and recite something, sing something, classical poem or just some little ditty, and then go on to the next guy. They were around the table and they came to me and what am I gonna do? And back in Japan, we had a special services hotel up in the mountains, Aso Kanko, by a volcano that eventually blew up and destroyed it. But Rosemary Clooney or somebody had the hit on the hit parade, "How much is that doggy in the window?" So I stood up and I started, "How much is that doggy in the window? Arf, arf! The one with the waggly tail. How much is that doggy in the window? I sure hope that doggy's for sale. I must make a trip to California, leave my poor darling alone. But if she has a dog, she won't be lonely, and the doggy will have a new home." Arf, arf. Well, everybody fell off the chairs laughing. And my fellow American advisors were looking at me quizzing, where'd you get that? But to me that was funny. But the serious part of that party is An Il-che, Mr. An relating his experiences in World War II. For 60 years, the Japanese occupied North Korea, all of Korea, and Koreans were their slaves. And when the war came, Mr. An and a bunch of Koreans were laborers on an island in the South Pacific with the Japanese army. This particular island, we decided just to bypass when they advanced across the Pacific on the island hopping battles. And toward the end of the war, when they realized that they were all starving, the Japanese were starving, no more supplies, the Koreans were starving, they realized that nobody's coming for them. the Koreans organized a uprising and killed all the Japanese. And my interpreter says, and then the problem was there was no food and everyone was starving. And so they ate the Japanese peoples. Interpreters, they all have broken English, so it was sort of funny sometimes the way they would express themselves. And Mr. An says, oh, Mr. An, he say, the best part of the Japanese to eat is the buttocks. And he patted both sides of his ass. That was both horrible and funny.
So, how many combat jumps did you make? Or how many jumps did you make while you were in the Army?
Only a total of 13. A lot of my friends had, like, they belonged to groups, they end up with 200 jumps, but I never had an opportunity. There was no airborne operations. Korea was all hills up and down. There was no major drop.
I think 187th did 2 combat jumps to Korea.
They were trying, small jumps, trying to rescue American prisoners on a North Korean train taking them north. And I don't quite remember whether it was successful or not, but I don't think it was too good. One thing I didn't mention to you before is that the initial battles, they were untrained American National Guard outfits that just happened to be there. And everyone was afraid of the front line, so there was a ranger, airborne ranger outfit, and they put them up in the front line to absorb all the shock, and they decimated them. They misused them. They had the American units stayed back, and they put the ranger battalion up fighting in front of them to protect them. So the remains of them came back and got into the 187th when I was there.
Okay. When did you leave Korea?
After the armistice, we had to vacate Koje-do because it was 90 miles north and had to turn it over to the North Koreans and Chinese. So we loaded all our partisan soldiers onto LST, blew up all our installations so not to give it to the communists. And we had already set up an island, Koje-do, down near Incheon, Seoul, and, all set up to receive us when we get down there. One funny thing is, as we went sailing down there, the British cruiser paralleled us, and all the British soldiers lined up on the deck in a line and started singing, serenading us, like HMS Pinafore. We sailed the ocean blue, the such a beauty, and the sea shanties and stuff. And the guy from the British cruiser with the megaphone said, "Will your chaps give us a song back?" And we tried to get our North Koreans to sing back. They were fuming. We always told them we would take them all the way up to the Yellow River and reconquer North Korea, and they could go home to their hometowns and become mayor, and everything would end good. Now we're cutting them off. They had no future. South Koreans don't like North Koreans, whether they're communists or not. And now they're going to be spilled out when the wars, finally end. It was on the end. And a couple of them committed suicide, jumped overboard with a bleak future. So they absolutely would not get up and sing about it. So the cruiser took off.
So when did you muster out of the Army?
Okay, we did basic things on Koje-do, kept everything intact, orderly and everything. The armistice was signed. The war was never no peace treaty was ever signed, and we're paying for it today. American politicians and public were tired of it. The Chinese could wait forever. The peace talks went on and on, so we finally gave in. We let them draw the line 30 miles north of Seoul in the mountains so they could zero in all the artillery on this city, which is now 13 million people and 40,000 American troops. So now, 60, 70 years later, we're being held hostage by baby Kim there because they could wait, and we, being what we are, Americans and politicians, signed anything just to get it done out and get out of there. So it was over, and my, what do you call it, D something or other discharge paper has the exact dates of when I went in and the exact dates when they discharged me, but it was like in September. Went to the repo depot and got on a slow freighter back to America, which was a terrible thing. The Puerto Rican regiment was misled or blamed for some bugging out in a situation where they could do nothing but run because there was no backup or anything. But they were accused of bugging out, and they lost their colors, which was the worst thing that could happen to a regiment. So they felt insulted by it, of course, as a country. It wasn't a country, it's part of America, but as a regiment. So they were surely, they would incorporate on this 13-day boat ride back to America. Nobody would clean up the puke and toilets overflowing and people pooping over the side, sleeping on deck because nobody could stand down. It was just a filthy, horrible 13-day mess back to like San Francisco. Everyone was very glad to get off the ship. And you got a long, long troop train ride through Texas in the south in Pullman cars. Pullman porters are there. They make your bed up. They serve you very good meals in the dining room with tablecloths and silver china and tinkling glasses, full-course meals and everything. It was aside from the tedium, it was a very comfortable trip. All the way back to New Jersey, I thought Dix or somewhere, where they did the processing, give you some money to put, and then I took a train and bus back home in Long Island where my mother was living.
Did you ever think about staying in the military?
No, I didn't. I thought that was the end of wars. Now, when you're not in combat, where things are sort of interesting, so to speak, garrison duty is tedious. Back then, before smartphones, before televisions were just coming, they had to make work, fill your day, marching you here and there, endless VD lectures, endless training for something you're not going to do, Foot Locker inspections, all that kind of stuff. A limited amount of books in the day room to read, once in a while an old movie, once in a while a third string USO troop. I remember one particular, a gal in a cowboy suit, a cowgirl suit with a lasso, and she twirling the lasso over her head, singing, yippee, that kind of stuff. It wasn't Bob Hope. And so I couldn't envision being in an army where you endless training, lectures, Saturday morning inspections, and just wait and wait. You know. So I get out, went back to America about 1 month before my 3 years were over, they discharged me, convenience of the Army, just not to have me feeding me for an extra month for no good reason. So that's the way it ended. Whereas my brother did almost 3 years in Korea, and then he went out, he somehow or other got jet pilot stuff in the New Mexico Air National Guard, and went back in the Special Forces as a sergeant. He went to the Army Medical School, became a Green Beret medic and intelligence officer, like he always was, and was back for 4 different tours in Vietnam, starting in 1962 and ending in 1969, with his about 5 Purple Hearts and lots and lots of stories and experiences, some of which he felt he couldn't tell, but when toward the end, I didn't know how sick he was. He was telling me, come back, and he would start relating his experiences on tape. That was before these fancy things were holding. And but he called me up from the hospital, and I flew back out, and he was on life support. And we got his 2 sons, one from Alaska and one locally, and they got to say goodbye and pull the plug, and that's how it ended with him. We didn't get all the stories there, because some of them.
It was classified for 20 years at MACV-SOG, my understanding, and they had to sign paperwork saying if they talked about it, they would go to prison and be fined.
Yeah, but and then there was a time when the Korean stuff and everything was released, that you know, long ago enough to be able to publish it or talk about it.
Correct. Yes. What did you do after the military?
I stayed at my mother's house in Long Island. I got a union job at Republic Aviation, making F-84F jets nearby. Had to join the machinist union, because everything was union, and I was pretty good at it. They had what they called Casey Jones Academy of Aeronautics, which was a 2-week course on how to rivet and do various metal work on the jets and so forth. And but I was in there a few months, and then they went on strike, or layoff or whatever. And I was the first one in, first one out. I sold hot dogs in Jones Beach for a bit, went into New York City, and started going to NYU in the daytime on my GI Bill, which wasn't enough. And so I had a full-time job as a all-purpose orderly in a small New York hospital run by Mother Cabrini nuns. And it was too much of a heavy load, and after about 8 months I sort of crashed. Anyway, friends, I got the job at J. Walter Thompson advertising agency, entry level. It was the biggest advertising agency in America, Ford, Shell Oil, things like that. But that entry, be a long time getting anywhere on that, and I had to wear a suit every day. And my friends were working in Times Square at Howard Johnson, and making 5 times as much. You know, you didn't have to declare all your tips, and you got 3 meals a day, full meals, all you could eat, a lot of tips, pay, and I did that, and I was sort of good as a waiter, and they noticed, and ended up being a manager for Howard Johnson's. 3 different restaurants. They were franchised by different people, and I was doing good, but I wanted to get out of the city, and I teamed up with an Irish friend of mine who, the Irish were supers in all the houses, superintendents. They got us a building. We ran around repairing buildings around Manhattan a bit for them, and they offered to make us the owners of a 6-story apartment building. They would back us, and we would work that, and we work on their other buildings because they liked what we did. But I wanted to get out of the city. I was tired of it. Went upstate New York, did restaurant work in a big inn in Chestertown, New York. The owner was dying, and the bank had the mortgage, and they knew I had a background. They offered to give me the inn with everything in it, stock, lock, and barrel, if I could get a New York State liquor license, which required an investigation, make sure no racketeering stuff. Got that, went in to the bar, and the young bartender says, "This is a great thing. The first thing I do when I get on, I pay myself $20 and I make it up during the night." And I put my new license in front of him. He said, "Oh, I guess I don't have a job anymore." I said, "You're right." Out he went. Became an innkeeper, cashed that in, bought a farm, mid-coastal Maine, and was there for like 10 years, doing 18th century farming with my farming neighbors next door. Very happy time. Ended up back down in Boston doing light construction with illegal Irish kids and lots of other different adventures which we won't go into because there are so many of them.
So you were part of elite 8240th, which is, you know, of the time the Special Operations of Korea, and so when you get out, was it difficult for you to talk to people about your experiences with 8240th?
Well, ordinary people, ordinary veterans have no point of reference, so they don't even know what you're talking about. But here in Rhode Island, I belong to the Rhode Island Special Forces Association of Rhode Island, which are people who are in these type of outfits, different kinds, and they connect with everybody, and other veterans have heard about it, and you know, and it's pointless trying to explain something like that to a civilian. They don't teach history anymore. For some reason, I'm going to be 90 in December. For some reason, I have total recall of when I'm talking about these episodes on the islands and the hospital and such. I'm actually seeing, you know, part of my brain is seeing it as I describe it and talk about it, and I hope that lasts, and I'm grateful for it. But it makes my life interesting to remember playing out in the yard in the 1930s in Long Island. We look up and hear the roaring noise, and it's one of the Hitler Zeppelins coming over our head with a swastika on it, like in 1937, 38, descending to land in New Jersey. The Hindenburg that blew up landing was not the only one. There was a couple of years a steady fleet of Zeppelins coming from Germany to Long Island there. And then after the Hindenburg exploded, they realized the danger of them, and they immediately went out of style. But that type of recall and everything, I enjoy explaining to people who are actually interested in that different periods that I lived through. But and my family stuff, I have hundreds of original family pictures that the only thing I could learn on the internet was how to Photoshop very well, and I put margins on the bottom of them, enlarge them, and type the captions on who, what, where, when, from the scribbling on the back of a snapshot that I improved. And I have hundreds of distant relatives around Newport here because they had big families, they married big families and so forth. But they like me because I'm the guy with the most pictures, and we have reunions, and I pass them out like candy when I can afford it. And so I enjoy doing that, and no regrets.
Okay, well, I think that's going to conclude the interview. Thank you for the interview, and thank you for your service.
Like Christensen. A true American hero. If you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe and give us a like. We are conducting more interviews with the assistance of viewers like you. Your donations will assist us recording the history of American heroes. You can donate on the History of MACV-SOG webpage www.sogsite.com. There is a donation page. Or on paypal.com specialoperationsgroup at comcast.net. Please visit the History of MACV-SOG www.sogsite.com. For all your special operations products and collectibles, please visit www.norbay.com. Thank you.